Hello, I'm Caz Graham, and this is the Farming Today podcast. In this edition, a new code of practice for tenant farmers and their landlords in Wales. It's only voluntary, so will it make any difference? And free-range poultry can range freely outdoors again, as the government downgrades the risk of bird flu.
Our experts have concluded that the risk of avian influenza has reduced to a level which is we deem to be low.
And we'll have more from the Deputy Chief Vet a little later. First, though, much of the UK enjoyed some truly spring-like weather yesterday with, dare we say it, more of the same promised for today, which is excellent news for farmers wanting to get out on the land. And we are talking about spring planting all this week. It can be risky planting a cereal crop in the spring because it only has a short time to grow. And with rising fuel and fertiliser costs, the future of spring cereals has become a real talking point. Anna Hill met up with Andrew Blenkiron on the Elvedon estate in Suffolk, which produces a significant volume of root vegetables for the UK market, and where spring barley is used as what's called a break crop in between them. She joined him in a field of carrots, which were being harvested, ready for the spring barley to be planted.
Try and get a carrot out.
Without breaking it is the key.
Oh wow,
Look at that. That's a mega.
That's super carrot.
It's been a great season for carrots.
On one side we've got where the carrots have actually been taken out. On the other side where they're still there. How much consideration do you have to give beforehand to planning how many acres you're going to put into spring cereal?
I suppose the answer to that question is market driven. Most of the time we would have a guaranteed price for that crop, a forward pricing mechanism. Because of the low yield potential of both the winter and spring barleys here, we try to add value to those crops. So in the spring barley case, the target market is always the malting market or growing seed for other people to plant in the autumn of this year. The benefit of the rotation here is having two root crops before the cereal is we can almost guarantee there's going to be no weed cereals in the cereal crop that we're growing for seed. We work on a 6-year rotation, and one of the principal reasons for growing cereals on this really light land root crop driven rotation is to give us a break crop. So unlike majority of arable farms in the country, we grow cereals as break crops.
And a break means a break between the root crops.
We operate a 1 year in 6 rotation here, so it's 6 years between crops of carrots, parsnips, onions and potatoes. They're our principal crops. Sugar beet, the same. The worst thing that possibly can happen here on this really light land is that you plant a nice crop of winter wheat or winter barley and you get it through to the end of April, and then we get a massive drought period and we lose the yield potential of that crop almost by the day from probably the middle of April onwards. And last year we applied 30 millimetres of water in one go, sort of mid-April to mid-May to those cereal crops, and that gets them well established. It helps get their roots down and gives them a fighting chance.
When do you decide that actually it's not worth it?
The crop that we're going to plant in this field after these carrots, it's getting towards our cut-off point when we say the yield potential of this in a good season has dropped from 6.5 tonnes to the hectare to 4 tonnes to the hectare. To cover our overhead costs, the cost of the labour, the cost of running the combine and everything else, as well as the variable costs, that's the fertiliser and the seed and the sprays. We need that 6 tonne to the hectare of a premium malting barley crop, and it really needs to be around that £220 a tonne, and of course it's nowhere near that at the moment. People are having to make some serious decisions. Maybe we would be better leaving the ground as fallow or just putting some form of cover crop in that allows the yield of the subsequent root crops to be a lot better. And we're entering that situation whereby I think we'll seriously need to find something else to grow in place of the cereals. One of the things that we have just submitted here is an application for an anaerobic digestion plant. Not particularly maize. It's not going to be a maize-driven AD plant, but it is going to use sequential crops, so potentially hybrid rye or triticales or something like that, so we can get a high biomass yield and get it into the AD plant. Guaranteed market on our doorsteps. cut all
Your
the
own
whole-
market, yeah.
Yeah, so that's something that we're looking at, and it might be some longer term crops like sort of lucerne that we can, or clovers that we can put in for a couple of years. Everybody's looking at this present situation as to how we can continue to survive and thrive as we move forward into this brave new world.
Andrew Blenkiron with Anna Hill. Mutual respect, better communication and greater clarity for all. Those are the key principles behind the new Agricultural Landlord and Tenant Code of Practice for Wales. It's just been published by the Welsh Government and has been heralded as a step change by the Tenant Farmers Association. Relations between tenant farmers and their landlords can be fraught, as we've reported often on this programme. England and Scotland now both have tenant farming commissioners, as well as their own codes of practice. Well, it's hoped that this new code for Wales will help foster positive landlord-tenant relationships. George Dunn, the Chief Executive of the Tenant Farmers Association, told me why he feels this new code is necessary.
For a long time now, we felt a bit like we were whistling into the wind when we were expressing concerns about landlords not really appreciating the tenant farmers that were farming their holdings. So we had reports of tenant farmers feeling bullied, feeling intimidated, feeling that they were getting the raw end of the deal in terms of the way in which their landlords were interacting with them on the tenancy agreements that they had. But as we have developed discussions in both England and now in Wales, there's clearly a wider recognition of those sorts of issues. And we've got, organisations like the RICS, who represents the surveyors, the CAV, who also represents surveyors, the CLA themselves, indicating that we need to have a better understanding of the way in which landlords and tenants need to operate together.
Can you tell me about some of the sort of key problems that come up?
So, the issues that come up on a day-to-day basis are, for example, in a rent review discussion, the landlord who needs to serve a notice a year in advance of a rent review may come very late in the day with ideas for how they want the rent to change and don't leave enough time for the tenant to be able to properly engage with that process, and then threaten the tenant with going to arbitration on that rent rather than settling for a rent which the landlord wants, which the tenant maybe doesn't think they can afford to pay. On issues like repairs, where the landlord doesn't undertake those repairs or doesn't undertake them in a timely fashion.
Land use change, certainly in England, has been a bit of a problem for some tenant farmers, with big estates saying that they don't want to have tenant farmers necessarily on certain bits of their land anymore. Has land use change been an issue for tenant farmers in Wales?
Indeed it has. Land use change is becoming ever more tricky to deal with. Obviously we have the issues around environmental improvement, we have renewable energy, we have issues around rewilding and rewooding of landscapes. And in those circumstances, we are very concerned that tenant farmers become dislocated from their farms in order to give way for these new land uses. And we are certainly in discussions with both the English and Welsh governments about how to ensure that the rights and the fairness that needs to be evident for tenant farmers is to the fore when those land use decisions are being made.
It's a voluntary code of practice. Will it really stop bad practice if it's not mandatory?
That's a $64,000 question. This is not a mandatory code of practice, but we are already seeing landlords begin to incorporate the code of practice into their tenancy agreements. So the one that we've had in England for a few years now has already been incorporated within the farm business tenancy agreements that are offered by the Crown Estate. And I heard today that the Ministry of Defence has also included the code of practice as part of its tenancy agreements with its tenant farmers. So although it is a voluntary code, by incorporating it into a contract of tenancy, it becomes a contractual obligation upon the parties to abide by that code. And obviously in England, we have a commissioner for the tenant farming sector who's overseeing that code and reporting back to DEFRA. We'd really like to see the Welsh Government do the same in appointing a commissioner for Wales who can oversee that code and provide that objective voice.
George Dunn from the Tenant Farmers Association. From tomorrow, free-range poultry in England and Wales will once more be able to venture outside into the sun, rain or whatever the weather decides to throw at them. Since early November, mandatory housing measures have required farmers to keep poultry indoors to reduce the risk of avian flu. But the government's Animal and Plant Health Agency says that risk is now low enough to let them outside again, which will come as very welcome news for free-range poultry farmers. This winter has seen a relatively low number of avian flu cases in England, 75 cases in all, a similar figure to the year before. Jorge Martin Almagro is the UK's chief deputy vet, and I asked him why the housing order is being lifted now.
Our experts have concluded that the risk of exposure for our poultry of avian influenza has reduced to a level which is we deem to be low. And that is dependent in how biosecurity is met. And with that evidence, we have been able to launch this measure, which goes live on the 9th of April.
And what do they base that decision on? Is it to do with the current status of avian flu in the wild bird population?
Indeed, the wild bird population plays an active role, as we have seen throughout the duration of this outbreak, which has been now a number of years. The risk in wild birds has deemed to be reduced to medium. That in itself means that they can still pose a risk, but the reduction is giving us clear evidence that we are in the right stage to allow birds to again come back and return to the ranges. All subject, and I need to stress this, to preparation and proper time for the birds to get accustomed to the ranges, and also a number of preparations that farmers need to undertake to make sure the risk of disease incursion of avian influenza continues to be mitigated.
Just to explain what kinds of preparations that you're talking about.
There are a number of things farmers can do, and it is all related to reducing that exposure to the virus. This virus can remain in the environment, mainly in cold temperatures, but in the current climate, now it's turning warmer. If there are, for example, areas where there are ponds or there is access for wildlife to come into close contact with the birds that we will be putting out, we are asking farmers to put all the necessary measures to mitigate access to either those wet areas or ponds. Again, farmers need to remain vigilant, and if they see any surfaces in the range that could again be dirty or need washing, those are to be attended to and cleansed and disinfected. So there are a number of measures, but more primarily and more importantly as well, the transition needs to be done in a smooth way, because birds have been kept in house for a number of months, and that also is important for us. The welfare is paramount, and that introduction back into the outside world is not only to protect them from a disease, but also to make sure that they do that in a way that is welfare friendly.
And are there things that farmers can do to help birds make that move outdoors? Because, of course, some of the birds won't ever have been outdoors before, will they?
Indeed, yes. Animals are creatures of habits, and they will want to find an easy transition that can be done in many different ways, making sure that, for example, in the exit areas, there are sufficient kind of stimulation and attraction for the birds to want to come out. But indeed, advice is to be sought, because every farm will have different issues and different circumstances. But there are, again, specific guidelines in gov.uk which explain what farmers can do to make that transition smooth.
OK, can we talk about vaccines? Because about a month ago, we spoke to the chief vet about the first UK trials of a bird flu vaccine that was being used in turkeys. How is that going?
It's a 24-week vaccination field trial that commenced on the 5th of March. Obviously, that is an ongoing trial, and I cannot provide specific details because we are still, as you can see, in the very early stages of the trial. We will provide more comments as the trial comes to an end, and with that, there will be a lot of evidence and data that we will be setting to inform decisions in future trials or future rollout of vaccine.
Jorge Martin Almagro, the UK Deputy Chief Vet. And that's all from us for this morning. I'm Caz Graham. The producer is Rebecca Rooney, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.